Hi everyone, I'm your host Matt Salem, and you've tuned in to another episode of Our Best Behavior, brought to you by Behaviorally. We are the global digital-first leader in defining and diagnosing human behavior to help you achieve the most valuable moment in marketing, when a purchase transaction occurs. We are Behaviorally, the transaction experts. Each episode, we share insights on trending topics within our industry and of interest to our customers. Today, very fortunate to be joined by two great guests. First, to my right, we have Ken Hauser, Senior Manager, Market Research over at Church & Dwight. And to my left, we have Francesco Ventisette, former Senior Director, Insights and Analytics at Pfizer Consumer Healthcare and former Group Head of Insights and Analytics, at Novartis. Sorry about that, Francesco, but I think the listeners got the gist. How are you guys today?
Good.
Good. Very
Great.
Cool. Good to be here with you both. We were fortunate to record one-on-ones prior, and now I got you both here. So to me, that just means we must do drinks and or cigars after the recording, maybe after 5 o'clock too. We're getting closer, though, as the day goes on. But before we go there, let's have some good conversation. So I wanted to talk a bit today about the power of packaging to drive shopper growth, which is a complimentary ebook that's on our website. It compiles over 50 years of best practice learning into what is an inspirational and practical guide to help create effective packaging design. And the very first chapter of that book is called Be Seen, Shoppable, Seductive, and Selected. And here at Behaviorally, we lovingly refer to that as the 4 S's. And that is essentially at the crux of all of the research that we conduct. And it really is the common threads that are interwoven throughout the entire Power of Packaging book. All of the other chapters somehow, some way tied to being seen, shoppable, seductive, and selected. So I guess just generally, I'll start with, up for grabs. What does that mean when you hear it, those 4 S's? What does that conjure for you guys as career researchers?
Go ahead. By the way, Ken and I work together, so we're very in tune with our thoughts and minds, I think. But I don't know, Ken, you want to go first? Or?
Well, you were mentioning be seen, be selected. I think all important components of packaging, right? Mm-hmm. You need to kind of, when you're at the shelf, first thing, definitely be in the consumer's mindset, be seen, be selected. What's the other? Be
shoppable.
Shoppable. We have to make sure that it's easy for the consumer. It's not difficult for them to try and figure out what they need.
Right. Right. And then seductive. And I know we talked about that when you and I were together last.
I mean, seductive, you kind of want to play into kind of what they're looking for. What's the consumer want out of, the experience there. So ultimately, get them to purchase. That's kind of where it's at.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, and building on that, I feel like what you described, that all these elements are intertwined, I feel like. So you may get the first one right and you're visible, but then the other ones don't pan out, and it's like the weakest link. All of a sudden you're not being purchased because, maybe you didn't communicate the benefit enough. But being seen is often one of the biggest struggles, especially in the US, because we have these big shelves. And so I know as a company and doing research, that was one of the main objectives, to try to break through that clutter. Mm-hmm. And some brands do it better than others, but it's not easy.
Yeah. No, and that really is kind of the starting point, I think, most of the time, right? Like, okay, how are we going to break through? There's so much competition out there. Even as a category captain or owner, it can still be death by 1,000 cuts when you have all these other small players trying to take away from your share. One thing that you said was interesting, Francesco, is the idea of they're all important, and you're only as strong as the weakest link. And when I think about research and success criteria, et cetera, a lot of times I feel like clients across the board are hoping to do everything well. But is that realistic? I mean, can you really change your pack and be seen more and communicate what you are more differently and have a point of difference communicated stronger and drive more buying, and add on X, Y, and Z? I mean, how do you think about those trade-offs? Because to your point, you're only as strong as the weakest link, but still you can never really, I don't know if you can at least improve everything in one fell swoop either.
Yeah, that's really difficult to do. I mean, I think you're looking for one thing that you want to try and focus on, and then stand hopefully at parity or maintain your position on some of the others, because especially when you're either launching a new product or you're going for a packaging redesign or change, you're trying to at least be better than you were, but definitely get across, one element better. Typically communication, like you're trying to communicate a new positioning or a new product or something like that.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. I like the idea of like, what are we really homing in on? And let's make sure we don't break anything else.
No, it's a good problem to have. I think it's almost impossible to have it perfect. I think you try to be visible, you try to communicate what you can. Also realizing that sometimes the communication is not only a shelf, but you have other opportunities to communicate the benefits through online and omni-channel and all that. But that said, I think for me, visibility is key. Like if you fail on visibility, that's directly tied to distribution and points of sale, right? If you're not visible, you get dinged. So to me, that is like the cost of entry. And then once you get visible, then you want to be picked up and considered. So the hierarchy starts to come into play.
Right.
We try to get it right. There's so many different factors that play at the same time. Our old CMO used to call it director drift, for example. You get everything in line. The research has one thing, and then the artistic director or the ad agencies come in and they want to change something that they feel like, oh yeah, this is just a small change. Turns out it's a big change. But and then at any point in the development, something could be a deviation from what you recommended. So that's the difficult part of getting it right.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. And, you said something in there that I wanted to touch on a bit more. You're talking about the point of sale. And in thinking about the 4 S's, though, in the book, being the book titled Power of Packaging, it's obviously tied to its namesake. I think those 4 S's also, in my mind, translate to point of sale materials, because the packaging drives the shopping experience, right? So if there's point of sale materials that's going to work in harmony with the packaging, you would think that the 4 S's also apply there. And I'm wondering, in your experiences, do you look at point of sale materials in similar light, at least in some way, shape, or form, maybe if not the 4 main areas that you're looking at?
So I'll jump in because I have an example of one research we were doing with CVS where we thought that the point of sale was key in drawing the attention because it was somewhat of a new brand that we were considering launching, and we were concerned about the shelf. And we designed different point of sales materials and things like that we thought would really be, eye-catching and having that stopping power. And I tell you, like we went to CVS and did sort of a virtual shopping experience. The consumers were it was just background noise. They were just passing by and not looking at these signs, but looking at product, looking up and down, but they were completely disregarded. So I think it is important. Like I think not long ago we were talking about floor talk and things like that. Those maybe have could be more efficacious, but I think if you put something on the shelf, don't necessarily assume that a shelf talker would jump at you because it's getting cluttered as well. So maybe a different standalone, thing could work.
Sure.
But those are expensive, so there's always this kind of trade-off. But
yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it became background noise. Yeah, Ken.
It could be complementary, too, to your messaging on pack. You don't always have to have the same claim or the same benefit exactly. It could be something, that you want to highlight and then draw them into the pack, which gives them more information as well. So, it could be, some additional, insight that you want to focus on or a different way, kind of drawing them in.
Yeah, sure. No, and I can kind of see that in my mind, even when it comes to maybe like shelf-ready packaging and, in a club environment, for example, might draw you in with a particular message, but then once you get the actual packs out of that holder, if you will, that's where you get kind of the rest of the information. That makes a lot of sense to me. In packaging work, obviously there's a starting point that's further upstream than what we've been talking about, right? So if I think about, again, the 4 S's, and if I think about how we're using them most commonly, and I say we collectively as researchers, not necessarily behaviorally, we tend to think about it most, I would argue, at the validation stage, right? Because you think of data, you think of justifying either this redesign or this new item launch to the stakeholders in your business, and you want to have that KPI mix that talks to them in a language that resonates, right? And it's like, hey, this will be seen more. We know that X% more see this, and it's a significant difference, et cetera, right? Or this message resonates better, so we know that it's seducing and it's seductive to our shoppers. If we think about where the idea comes from for the pack or the product inside the pack, and ideation and co-creation, can the 4 S's get further upstream? Is that part of the process? I mean, I'm sure it is to some degree, but I guess my question is, are you thinking about it as explicitly when you're ideating or when you're co-creating with consumers? Does it come into play earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, I think you are trying to take, the package into consideration, but as an extension of the brand, I think, so you're trying to extend your positioning into what the consumer is going to see as they walk the shelf. What they think of you is kind of that perception. So I think, we are thinking of it as we're developing, packaging. We're thinking of how does the positioning play into it, what elements, style, colors, things like that, to help consumers feel like this is the brand for them. So yeah, it does come into play. And communication too, how important, what role do we want the brand to play? Is it a brand that consumers know? Is it a brand that we need to emphasize more? Things like that, definitely come into play more upstream as we're developing.
Yeah, I like what you said about the extension of the brand. I think that's really true. In reality, I don't know if it always happens, because sometimes, unfortunately, some brands in some companies, they don't have a good idea of what the brand stands for. Believe it or not, right? They sort of like, oh, it's a brand that's been around forever. But when you talk about what is the vision, what do you want to maybe take this brand forward towards an objective and ideal, they don't have that. They sort of just manage the brand from a more tactical standpoint. For those brands, then the packaging becomes, oh, well, we'll do a packaging refresh because it's been 20 years and we're starting to get a little dated. That's not necessarily a good reason. I think you should always have this vision of what you stand for, where do you want to go. And then the package should be that extension to support you, right? Because it's basically tied to the essence. And if you nail that correctly, I think consumers will get it and buy into the brand, into the idea, because it shows up a certain way. It's not arbitrary.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. So in those innovation sessions you went upstream, if you do it right, absolutely, it should be considered as part of the key elements of the brand design, because it's an expression of everything that's cohesive. But it's surprising how many brands don't have that, because I don't know why. You sort of like you have to push back on the teams, right, to say like, what's your brand map? What's your essence? What are you doing with this brand? And sometimes you get the blank stare. Unfortunately. I mean, we're guilty of it too, right? I mean, we get sucked into the motions sometimes and we don't ask the right questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think it plays into it. You want to come across as maybe more scientific, more emotional. Yeah. The way you're kind of designing the pack has something to do with that as well, how you come across to the consumer, typeface, everything, even the way the design is laid out could be influential in that way.
When you're thinking about kind of the brand that has legacy, and perhaps either it's been resting on its laurels a bit too much, or it truly is entrenched in consumers' minds that this brand owns ABC, and thus when we redesign, we have to think about it a certain way, or if we extend the brand into kind of new innovation, we have to think about protecting certain key visuals or points. If you think about that through the lens of being seen, shoppable, seductive, and selected, does that impact what's more important? In other words, that brand that has that tradition and that heritage versus perhaps a newer brand, whether it's brand new blue sky or perhaps just relatively speaking newer to the marketplace? Because earlier I heard you both, I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, agree that visibility seems to be kind of chief amongst them all in a way, because it starts with being seen. And I'm just wondering, when you are that brand with heritage in particular, I guess one can argue that, well, you're probably going to get seen because you're the biggest brand. Like a lot of times these heritage brands are the biggest brands in the category, right? And you know, they're seen by default almost because maybe they own 50% of the space on shelf or something. So
Right.
is visibility still kind of the top dog there, or does the priority shift at all?
Well, I think it is important to understand what consumers think or know about you as a brand, right? I think we do some exercises sometimes where we have consumers actually just, you know, blank draw what they think the package looks like so that we can understand what elements, you know, come to mind first. And that helps us to understand kind of what's resonating with them. But, you know, that doesn't mean you have to keep everything that you had previously just because you're scared of, you know, taking something away. I think you have to understand what's important for the consumer to know and take away.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think when it comes down to a master brand that is highly top of mind for consumers, for me, you shouldn't necessarily assume that even though you're the sort of the top gun, that if you lose shelf visibility, everything will stay the same. Because we have seen in brands that were, you know, very popular, that when you lose you know, visibility on the shelf, the graph just points south, and it's drastic. And the competitors are aggressive, so they will come in, and people are curious. So I think it's a very dangerous game if you play the shelf game, right? But then nowadays there's Amazon, there's all sorts of different channels where the game is different. Then all of a sudden maybe visibility, it's not whether you pop on the shelf, but whether you come up in the search at the top. And so it varies. It's complicated. New brand, it's easier in a way because you're starting from scratch. An established brand, you were talking about, you know, you have equity. Right. And so when you want to stretch it, then people are concerned that we're stretching it too much. And in my mind, sometimes when you talk about stretch, oh my gosh, people are overly concerned about stretching the brand footprint too much. And I feel like, no, in a lot of cases, actually consumers allow you to go not too far, but quite far, maybe a little further than you would have thought. But we tend to be very conservative. It's like, oh, we can't change the this equity or that and that and that. So it's
a balancing act.
Handled with care.
Yeah.
It's
Handled
a balancing,
with care.
Right.
It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you brought up the e-commerce angle, because if you think about the digital shelf, so to speak, it's not like brick and mortar. I mean, it's
Right.
a list of items that are coming up many times. Or if it is a grid, probably on your screen you're seeing, 3x2, 3x3, something along those lines. And it's still, even the way it's laid out, it's very individualized, right? It's like every SKU has its own space around it.
Right.
It has equal space. When you guys are thinking about research in the e-commerce realm, what are some of the KPIs that you're focusing on? Is visibility even in the mix for you? Is it more around copy communication that supports the visual? We've seen in our research that the visual still certainly catches a majority of eyes quickly, right? Because, frankly, as humans, we're using mnemonics all the times, and visuals work a lot faster than words, right? But, that online shopping experience, you really want to make sure. Look, I've fallen to buying ground coffee instead of whole bean online more than once. And I tell you, each time I never thought I was buying the ground until it showed up at my house, right? Because those mistakes can happen, right? So like, what becomes most important in an online environment where the playing field is organized differently?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge. It's different than in store. I think, there's points of communication. You have to get them across, as well. In there, you have a little bit more room to do that. But I think also there's a couple different, product shots that consumers get exposed to. So you have a little bit more room there in terms of what they're going to see. People don't always turn the pack over at shelf, whereas they will flick on, a couple different product shots to see kind of different information or, zoom in on something.
That's a great point. Just thinking about my own personal experiences, right? When I'm in brick and mortar, I'm just looking with my eyes, and when I find what I want, pretty much, maybe I'll pick something up, but I'm not really flipping it over too much, especially on lower ticket items, right? If I'm buying something that's more expensive, I might want to seek out a bit more information, but faster moving / inexpensive items, but online, I think once you're hooked in, at least for me, I do interact a bit more with the thumbnails on the PDP and such. So, yeah, that's interesting. I don't know, Francesco, if you have differing thoughts.
For me,
similar
online
thoughts?
is an opportunity for the behavioral science nudges to really come into play, because you can, well, it depends. Like if you go on the website, a product website, then you can have different offerings, and depending how it's presented, you can actually test whether one visual or presenting different options of maybe a product on sale or what have you will bring action to purchase more so than not, right? So those are nice experiments from a behavioral science perspective. For example, having social proof at the bottom of the product, say, number one rated product in North America, I don't know, something like that. Most people tell you, yeah, that doesn't make a difference. If you ask a consumer, I don't read those. But in reality, you put it in with and without, and you do a test, and the one with wins over the one without. So for me, online is great to do those experiments. Of course, on Amazon, it's a different ballgame. It's very quick. Some people read the reviews, and they're skeptical about them, so it depends on the number of stars and a bunch of different factors. And then it's a very standard format, so you don't get to interact as much. But it's more flexible online than on the shelf, because on the shelf you can't, it's a little bit more like the brick and mortar thing. It's more difficult to go in and change things around and test.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think, online is driven by algorithms too, right? So your distribution is not set for a period of time. Like you're not there for until they kick you out off the shelf if you don't perform. You're there for, as long as you can hold consumers' attention, right? And stay on that first page or second page.
Which isn't that long, probably,
exactly.
right?
It's really important to make sure you have the right information, you're grabbing them and staying compelling to folks.
And there's AI now testing different visuals, what's catching your attention more, so that maybe it's not even the package, it's another visual that you have along with the package that grabs your eye and you click on it.
Absolutely.
So more variables for sure.
Absolutely. More to contend with.
Yeah, but also easier to test, in a way.
A bit more ability to control and test than, to your point. You can't just go into any single store and start ripping apart their shelf and restacking it. I mean, it's digitally to create a controlled environment. It's a bit easier in some ways than it is physically to create a controlled environment.
And even if you make a change, it's not that big of a deal. You experiment, you make a change, you launch, you see what happens in a week, and then you can change it. It's not dramatic online for some reason.
Right. Okay. Let me ask you guys, as we start to come to a close here, is there anything in the past that you both got to partner on together in your professional lives? I'm not talking about hanging out on the weekend, guys. I'm talking about professionally. Have you had the ability to partner on a project in the past?
Well, I'll jump in because I think Ken and I worked together on the category of immunity, where we started to consider how do we build a category of immunity. We had products on immunity, but we wanted to develop the category, really, like own more than products, own a portfolio. So if we were, the quest was, if we were to build a portfolio of immunity products, what would be the underserved need or the unmet need of the consumer? What does immunity mean to the consumers? How do we build it? Because we weren't the first ones in immunity, obviously, but how do we do it differently? And so Ken was leading the efforts, and I was also part of the team. It was a lot of fun. We did it for about a year or so. The company didn't want to invest ultimately in the category, which in hindsight was probably a mistake because, of the global pandemic that knocked on everybody's doors.
This is pre-pandemic. It was more challenging, right? But, at the same time, it was definitely a need space that consumers were looking for.
Maybe they unearthed that one once the pandemic came around. Who knows? Maybe they dug back in the vault to see where the notes were from those meetings.
Because we had good stuff. But the reason why we wanted to focus there is because it came up when working with Ken in looking at trends and what consumers were concerned about. And, there was plenty of trend reports that said, we're overdue for a global pandemic and people are concerned about germs. And, you notice all these products about cleaning hands even back then, right? So there was a big unmet need and not just from ingestibles like vitamins, but also from other type of products to meet that.
So if I'm hearing this right, Ken predicted the global pandemic.
Yeah, that's
I wouldn't
it.
go that far.
Yeah.
I would not go that far.
Careful.
Well, hey guys, I really appreciate you both coming on with me today. I appreciate it professionally, more so personally. You guys are good friends, and thanks for coming on. Thanks to our audience for tuning into Our Best Behavior, brought to you by Behaviorally. Thanks, Francesco. Thanks, Ken, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to be here.